I know you've probably heard about Annabelle, the haunted doll, but did you know that there is a doll far more haunted and far more dangerous than Annabelle? It's Robert the doll. He's responsible for car accidents, deaths, curses. You name it, Robert's done it. And if you will stay tuned to the end of this video, I will tell you my personal experience with Robert the doll. Hello, my silky friends. It's that time again. If you're new to the channel, I'm Lily. This is Silky Southern Tea. We talk about vintage crime, vintage mysteries. We're going to be running through it because it can, you can go down the rabbit hole on this one. And let me just tell you real quick, we are ditching the hot tea today. Yeah. Because guess what? Even though it's September, it's hot in Alabama. So we are switching to, you can't see it, but it's cold iced tea. Yeah, sweet tea. That's what we're doing. Today's hat. Let's start in about 1898 in Key West, Florida. Mr. and Mrs. Otto, a doctor and his wife, moved into this lovely little pink house in Key West. Now, being a doctor in those days did not automatically mean you were rich. Now, they were better off than a lot of people, but they weren't super wealthy. Doctors, most of the time, honestly, just gave away their services because a lot of people couldn't afford them. If a doctor wanted to make money in those days, he had to have a pharmacy. Anyway, Mr. Otto had a pharmacy across the street from his house, and so even though they weren't wealthy by today's standards, they did have a housekeeper. Now, they probably actually had several, and it gets a little convoluted, so I'm going to go through some of the possibilities because we are talking about the origin of Robert the doll. Now, when Mr. and Miss Otto got married, of course, children started coming along, and they had a little boy named Robert Eugene Otto. Now, Robert, he was just a little standoffish. Maybe we'd call him odd. I don't know, by today's standards, maybe we'd call him nerdy. He didn't have, as far as we know, a whole lot of friends. He was kind of just, yeah. You know how you just meet somebody and they're just kind of weird? Well, that's kind of the way Robert was. So he comes into possession of this doll. The things that we do know about this doll is that it was made by the Steiff Company in Germany. And most likely, because it was so large, it was 40 inches tall, which is way taller than any kind of doll that, they made for, kids to play with. It is believed that it was either a clown or a jester or something for a window display. However that came about, the most popular story is that his grandfather, being on a trip to Germany, brought Eugene the doll back. The other story is that it was actually a cursed doll from the beginning because the Ottos had a servant. Yeah, even though they weren't wealthy, they could still afford servants back in those days. I mean, I don't know what I have to do. What kind of money do I have to make to have a servant? I mean, I really want one. Yeah, here I am. She was either from the Bahamas or Haiti, but one of the popular stories is that Miss Otto went outside, found her doing some kind of witchcraft or voodoo ritual out in the yard, and she had a complete breakdown. Well, I mean, I can kind of imagine, I wouldn't want somebody doing, stuff in my yard, but, that's just me. So it said that she got so angry she immediately fired the housekeeper, and as revenge she took this doll and cursed it and gave it to their little boy. I mean, it sounds like a good story. It could be true. I don't know. The other story comes from one of the curators, I think, of the house in Key West, which I think this might be a little bit more believable. Apparently there was a domestic servant named Emmeline, something like that worked for the Ottos. It is said that she started having an affair with Mr. Otto and became in the family way. She gave birth to a child. Now, we know that there was another child there in the house because of the census. And I can't remember the year, but like in the early 1900s, there was a child listed on the census along with her and the Ottos living in the house. And then just a couple of years later, poof, child gone. So it is believed the child died. Of what we don't know. But they feel like maybe that child kind of just, got really attached to Robert and went into the doll. I don't know. I don't know how this happens. Ask Chucky. I'm not sure. But at some point, little Robert Eugene Otto gets a doll, a 40-inch doll. And this doll, strangely enough, becomes his best friend. I mean, he is obsessed with this doll. So much so that he takes his own little sailor suit that he wore and he puts it on the doll. The little hat. He even insists that his parents call him Eugene or Gene, which was his middle name, because Robert the doll, his name was Robert now. So don't call me Robert. That's Robert. The doll is Robert. I'm Eugene. Kids can do, some weird stuff. My kids did weird things from time to time. And so I guess his parents didn't think a whole lot of it. But what started happening is that Eugene started spending all of his time with this doll. Like they were inseparable. And if he went somewhere, Robert went with him. He even sat him at the dinner table and, like he was a human. So the parents knew that he was obsessed with the doll, but, it's kind of like a teddy bear that your kid drags everywhere. You don't think a whole lot about it. But then they started hearing Robert in his room talking to somebody. And they thought, did a neighbor, did somebody come over to visit? Although Gene wasn't like, Mr. Popularity. They thought, okay, somebody's in there with him. So that opened the door and they would see little Eugene sitting there with Robert the doll. But what was crazy is that before they'd open the door, they would hear Eugene talking and they would hear another voice answering back. Much lower.
Deeper voice.
Open the door. It's just Eugene and Robert. That is concerning. I mean, at that point, I would have taken the doll and torched it. There's a cat crying in the background. So, as time passes, like the relationship between Robert and Eugene just gets more unnerving. Then strange things start happening. Eugene's other toys start getting mutilated and things are broken and the house is trashed and then, the parents come in and they see Eugene and they get angry at him, like, why did you do this? Why did you tear up your toys? Why did you break the lamp? Why did you, whatever. And Eugene would say, it wasn't me, it was Robert. Well, at first you kind of think, whatever, kid, I get it. My kids, they used to blame everything except themselves. For a long time, we had another entity in my house called Not Me. Because whenever I said, who did this? It was not me. So the parents probably did not assume that it was Robert. However, they would hear footsteps and something running around the house a lot of times when there was nobody else there. And if you've ever seen any videos of this house, like it's not that big and the rooms are very close. And living in an old historic house myself, I know that rooms are smaller, and in spite of the way it's built, you can hear stuff all over the place. It is hard to not hear what's going on anywhere in the house. So they would hear things. Eugene's behavior with the doll just got too bizarre. They decided, okay, the obsession is enough. We're taking this doll and we're locking him in the attic. So they go up there and they put him in a wooden box, nail it shut, and that's the end of Robert. Well, of course, Eugene was devastated, but for years afterwards, they would hear footsteps all in the attic and up in places where it was an inhabited part of the house. They would hear all these footsteps and banging and noises, and there was nobody upstairs but Robert, who was locked, nailed in that, box. Okay, so time passes and Eugene grows up and he decides to be an artist, and he goes to Chicago and he studies there. He studies in New York and then on to Paris. And finally in Paris he meets a lady named Annette Parker. They fall in love. They get married. In the meantime, Eugene's parents have passed away and now he is the owner of the house. So he's excited. He and Anne moved back to Key West because this house is like perfect for an artist. I mean, the light, the weather, it's amazing. And they're going to have this wonderful life. Well, that was the plan. What happened was they get there, and as he's going through the stuff, Eugene goes upstairs and there is, the box with Robert in it. So the first thing that he does is he, emancipates Robert from the box. And even though he is a grown adult married man, he starts this weird relationship with Robert once again. Yeah, a doll. So he and Robert are best buds. He takes Robert up to the upstairs, room where he paints his whole studio. And for hours and hours and hours, Robert sits in the room and they're just, chilling, talking, whatever. This goes on for a long time. And, his wife, Anne, gets quite perturbed. As a matter of fact, she begins to really, really resent Robert. Well, you can imagine. I mean, I just married a guy. I think it's going to be a great life. All of a sudden, he's spending all his time with a doll. It's just weird. But then Anne starts experiencing these paranormal things as well. I mean, she hears footsteps. Robert moves from place to place when there has not been anybody else in the house. Like, he's in this one place, and you turn around, and 2 minutes later, he's in some other part of the house. And they hear these little footsteps running through the house like it was a child. There is absolutely no explanation for this. She's done. She's done with Robert. She wants him out. Eugene is not going to let him be, boxed up again. And I don't think Robert actually was going to put up with that either. So years pass and their marriage just, disintegrates. There is no communication. All he wants to do is spend time with Robert and paint and, whatever. So Anne gets very frustrated. Of course, divorce wasn't really an option. And they said that Eugene, although he wasn't physically abusive to her, he was pretty emotionally abusive. He degraded her. He just treated her as less than what she should be. And she was a very talented person herself and in her own right. And it's even said that one day when he was having an art exhibit and it was opening up, they were going to the opening together and he told her to wait for 10 minutes. She was not allowed to walk in with him. He wanted 10 minutes to just go in and bask in the glory of himself without distraction, because he knew that once Anne came in, she was going to get the attention because she was just a very bubbly, I guess, type of likable person. It was kind of the cold shoulder, yeah. And I mean, I'm just telling you, in a marriage, you cannot take second place to a doll. Not to anybody, but honey, a doll, homie, don't play that. So time passes, and this doll is just getting out of hand. Robert starts some shenanigans that are way more dangerous. He starts to push people, shove them into closets and lock the door. Like, you can't get out. And so now Anne is like, okay, I've had it. I've had it with this doll. So Gene won't lock Robert up, but he does kind of banish him to the top. I am so sorry about this cat. I don't even know. The cat never does this. The cat literally never stands at the door and whines. As a compromise, Eugene takes him to I think it's called like the turret room. It's like this big room. It's got lots of, windows, and then there's this top place where he painted and where he set it up, a whole room just for Robert. But it's a compromise because Eugene said that's what Robert wanted. He wanted windows. Okay. I guess Robert told him that. I don't know if he was speaking in a real voice or if it was telepathic. Who knows? Here is where it gets interesting. So school children are coming down the street and, Robert's up in this top place with all these windows and they see Robert. The kids, I don't know, I guess they're staring at the house, the freaky old man that takes his doll everywhere and talks to him, whatever. People talked. I mean, it's the South. School children would stop by and they would see Robert in the window, and then all of a sudden, he wouldn't be in the window. He would be in a window somewhere else nearby, and he was obviously moving. There wasn't a person moving him, so this strangeness continues for the next 40 years until 1974 when Eugene passed away. Now, the problems between Eugene and Anne and Robert were so bad that when Eugene died, he and his wife had collected all kinds of art and antiques, and there was a lot of contents that could be used, and including his artwork that she could have sold to, make a living after his death. But no, Gene was kind of a horse's rear end, and he left all of his possessions, all of the contents of the house and all of his artwork and all of their very expensive antiques, to his sister. And to Anne, he leaves the empty house and Robert, the doll. Gee, thanks, buddy. Yep, I bet if she had known that was coming, things would have ended a little differently. I'm just saying. So anyway, he passes away. Anne has no money. She has none of the material possessions they have. She can't afford this house to run the house and all this kind of stuff. So she sells it for a mere $50,000. So anyway, the sister dies and the property ends up being bought by Myrtle Reuters, who bought the contents, the house, the whole thing, and Robert. Miss Reuters knew that there was something odd about Robert. It's not like she didn't have paranormal experiences, but he lived with her for 20 years. What is it with this doll? What kind of hold does he have on people? I don't know. But anyway, right before Miss Reuters passes, finally she says, you know what? I've lived with this for 20 years, and now I'm going to talk about it, and I've had enough. Because the day that Robert got mad at her and locked her in the attic closet, she's like, Robert, we're done. You cannot live here anymore. I am evicting you. So she donates him to the East Martello Museum in Key West. Well, at first they get this doll, and it's okay, cool, doll. But they really didn't have him on display. I don't know. It was just kind of like an antique doll, really interesting looking. Weird stuff starts happening at the museum. Yeah, Robert's running around there. He's always somewhere else than where they put him. And someone who was taking care of a display close by kept saying, hey, Robert keeps knocking on my display. I really don't understand. Did they see him? I don't know. This was a complaint. So they put Robert in a glass case. Here is where the story continues. So apparently, Robert gets ticked off easily. You can't just go walking up on Robert and take his picture or take a video. No, because if you do that and you don't ask permission, then a curse comes upon you. Now, I would normally poo-poo this whole idea and say, that's ridiculous. But there are literally thousands of letters and videos. They get letters every day from people who are writing to Robert asking for his forgiveness, saying, I went to see you, I took a picture, and I didn't ask permission, or I made fun of you, or I dissed you in some way, and this is what happened. I had a car accident, I got cancer, I lost my house, my business went under, and it's been not just one tragedy, but just it keeps going on, and people are realizing, hey, this has got to be a curse, because life just ain't this bad. Yeah, you have all of these actual apology letters to this doll. And that is where he stays today. And of course, there's all kind of paranormal activity. People say that he moves. So you've made it this far. Let me tell you about my experience with Robert. You know, first of all, when we went into the museum, they didn't tell me exactly where he was. They just said, go down this hall. Well, I don't know how far. And this is kind of like a maritime museum. It's very interesting. And I'm such a nerd. And I'm reading all these things about the antiques. Now, it is hot. It's Key West. It is like armpit dripping, drench, wet, hot. Did I say hot? So we're in the museum, and I don't have a whole lot on. There is no air conditioning in there because it's kind of like an old, I don't know if it's kind of like an old fort or something. That's what it's built like. They do have electricity for lights, but that said, you're on your own for heating and air. So I'm walking through there, and I'm looking at all this stuff, and I'm really interested. And all of a sudden, I feel cold, like an Arctic wind. And I looked at my daughter who was with me, and I said, I thought they didn't have air conditioning in here. And I said, is there air? Do you feel it? She's like, no. And so I just thought, that's really weird. And I got like goosebumps everywhere. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know. Maybe there's just a weird coastal breeze coming through here. I don't know. So I keep walking a few steps, and literally, I mean, there is Robert. There's no warning like, hey, you're approaching Robert the doll. It's just like, boom, there he is. And so I'm standing there, and I want to take pictures just for my own self, and I feel really stupid asking a doll's permission. I'm not going to lie. It was like, I don't want to do this. But I'm like, Bella, shouldn't I? So finally, I'm like, I'm going to take your picture if it's okay. Do you mind? Just want to take a little bit of video, a little bit of pictures. That's it. And then I stood there. Because, is he going to answer me? I looked at Bella and I'm like, am I supposed to wait till he says something? You know, in which case I'd be bolting out of there anyway. Nothing happened, so I decided, okay, I'm going to take some video. And honestly, you know, you can only take so many angles, and I took a little bit of video, a little bit of picture. We were very quiet walking around there, and I, honest to God, thought that I saw him move, like his head, not his arms or anything, like almost like a blink or just like a little tiny. And then I thought, you know what, you're just making crap up. Like, you know, you're hallucinating because it says, you know, Robert the doll, whatever. But I immediately, after I had gotten that cold chill, it kind of went from on the outside to my arms to like the inside. I don't know if you've ever felt a chill, like you have a popsicle stuck straight up in your esophagus or in your intestines. I was cold on the inside. And then I got so severely nauseated. Like, I just wanted to puke. I got dizzy. I got sick, and I couldn't stay around Robert very long. I was just like, you know, Bella, I'm not feeling good. I'm just, still, at this point, I'm still thinking it's like something in the museum, that there's some smell or there's some whatever, something in that area that's making me sick. Maybe it's, I don't know. I'm still not really putting it together with Robert. I'm just thinking, okay, all of a sudden I've gotten sick and cold, and I don't know what's going on. So I go down to some other displays, and there's a story right next to his. Amazing. I'm going to tell that next week. Mind-blowing. Anyway, so we're going through the museum, and I really want to look at it more, but I'm just getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and colder and colder. But anyway, so we get outside the museum, and I'm like, honey, let's go out into the yard, because there's things out there to see, too. I said, I've got to get out of this building. I'm so cold. So I'm going outside, and I am in the blazing hot sun. I mean, it was very hot and sweaty. And she, by that time, I mean, she's normal, and she's hot. She's like, God, Mom, it's so hot. I'm like, I cannot get warm. I cannot. I'm grabbing these iron statues that are nice and hot, and I'm just, like, trying to hold on to them, trying to make myself warm. Long story short, we ended up leaving. I didn't spend a whole lot of time there because I was so sick. And I thought, okay, this is weird. So I get in the car, and it wasn't until we were about 30 minutes away. We had gone in into Key West. I parked, and after we had walked around about 30 minutes after leaving the Martello Museum, that all of a sudden I started feeling better. Like it just started going away. And I felt better and better until I felt normal. I never was sick except for then. So, that made me wonder, like, it only happened around Robert. And I didn't even know I was around Robert when I first started getting cold because I hadn't seen him yet. Later on, when we left and we were on our way back to Alabama, she says, Mom, I know this is weird. She said, but she says, I could have swore that he moved. I was like, oh, nuh-uh. She's like, yeah. She says, it's probably just in my head. I said, you know what? I could have swore he moved too. And she's like, we started timing it, like where she was, and basically we realized it was the same time, the same thing. We thought we saw his head, eyes, something just move slightly, just enough to make you look. Fast forward to like some months later, I am on the phone with a friend of mine in Alabama, and we're talking about it. I said, hey, have you ever heard this story of Robert the dog? I started telling her, and I said, what's really crazy is this is what happened to me when I was at the museum. And all of a sudden, I'm trying to tell her, and she's like, I think I had been planning to go over there anyway, and she's like, she says, like, can you just tell me about it when you get here? Just come on over, like, just come on now, and I want to tell you something when you get here. I said, okay. So I didn't know what was going on. I get in my car, I go over to her house, and I'm like, something wrong? And she said, when you were telling me that story about you and Robert, she said, all of a sudden I heard like somebody breaking through on the line. Now we're on our cell phones. I don't usually have any interference. And she said it was a voice. She said it wasn't just that I heard something. Both of us were in our houses. Like there was no background noise. And she said, but I heard somebody in the background, and she said, it was another language. She said, I didn't understand it. She said, but it sounded like a chant. Somebody was just chanting and chanting. And she said, I couldn't really hear what you were saying for all this chanting going on in this other language. Yeah, that was freaky. That was really freaky. I myself did not hear it, but she was freaked out about it. So there's a lot going on with Robert, and I would say he has a much longer history than Annabelle, and I would have to say he's my number one for haunted dolls, and I'm not really a stranger to haunted dolls either. Do you believe a doll can be cursed? And if you do, what do you think it is? Was like it that the child spirit, or was it the curse, or people say there's demonic entities? What do you think? Or do you think it's all hooey? Just let me know below. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this, and we will have another bizarre story coming up again next week, because that is what we do here. And drink tea. Anyway, I hope you have a great week, and remember to stay silky.